France and other countries, other Western countries who have recognized a Palestinian state, explicitly ruled out a role for Hamas. Israel's ground assault on Gaza City is intended to wipe out the militant group's remaining strongholds. But Hamas has so far proved remarkably resilient. After nearly 2 years of war, it remains in control of parts of Gaza.
Gaza City under assault. Israeli tanks and soldiers pounding densely populated urban areas. Many have fled, while others are unwilling or unable to leave, as Israel says it's pursuing thousands of Hamas militants holed up in the city. The number of Hamas fighters and the number of those killed is unclear, and there are no verified statistics. Israel estimates that Hamas had more than 30,000 fighters at the time of its terror attack on October 7, 2023, and claims to have killed more than 17,000 in fighting since then. But earlier this year, U.S. intelligence said Hamas may have recruited nearly that many new fighters. Last year, an Israeli military analyst told DW that 70 to 80% of Hamas's arsenal has been captured or destroyed. Senior leadership within Gaza has been decimated. Yahya Sinwar, the group's former leader in Gaza, is dead, as is his brother, who succeeded him. The former political leader and the head of the military wing are also gone. But after Israel launched an attack in Qatar earlier this month, the group said its leadership was still intact. Hamas has become decentralized. Rather than large organized assaults, it focuses on guerrilla tactics and mounts hit-and-run attacks on Israeli soldiers in Gaza. But its ability to strike outside of Gaza has been severely compromised. Some of its extensive tunnel network, mostly in Gaza City and its surroundings, may still be intact, which makes those hit-and-run attacks possible. It could also allow fighters in Gaza to move to other areas, as well as hide the remaining Israeli hostages. Social services were one way Hamas built its profile before the war. Now, most of Gaza's hospitals are in ruins and its educational infrastructure is destroyed. Fueled by widespread despair and anger after 2 years of war, Hamas still gains new recruits. If it really wants to destroy the group, Israel may be in for a war that will last far into the future.
Well, for more on this, we're joined now from New York City by Hans-Jakob Schindler. He's the senior director of the Counter Extremism Project. That's an international organization that publishes research and policy papers on extremism and terrorism. Good to see you again. Hans-Jakob, Israel has left no stone unturned in its effort to destroy Hamas. Why has it not succeeded?
Look, first of all, Israel is running into the same challenges that any nation fighting an insurgency of the terrorist kind has been running into in Afghanistan and Iraq. As long as you leave parts of the territory in which the terror group operates out of your own control, you're enabling the terror group to move fighters always into the areas where you're not, while you're clearing the areas where you are. So this is a very cruel whack-a-mole game. It is a question of resources that Israel never committed a sufficient number of ground troops to control the entirety of the Gaza Strip, nor was it politically the government willing to accept an alternative security forces to take over control of the entirety of the Gaza Strip. So that means Hamas, while nowhere near the military and terrorism threat that it posed prior to October 7, 2023, it could continue this harassment attacks, these terror attacks against the Israeli defense forces inside the Gaza Strip and beyond, because there have been also Hamas attacks in Israel proper for a very long time.
So what do you make then of Israel's claims that it is close to defeating Hamas? And what about the Israeli population? Do Israelis believe that?
Look, there's a very large portion of the Israeli population who is very justifiably very worried about the hostages, alive and dead, that Hamas is still holding. By the way, there are several German nationals still in Hamas custody as hostages, just as an aside note. Of course, Hamas has been degraded to a significant extent. But you said they have left no stone unturned. There is one big stone that neither the Israelis, nor the Americans, nor the Europeans really have been focusing on, and that is the Hamas money, which is not primarily in Gaza, but internationally distributed. As long as this terror group has enough money, has enough willing people who it can recruit in Gaza and beyond, it will, of course, continue as a terror concern. Hamas did not start with a military infrastructure the size of it had prior to October 2023. It started as a typical classical cell network of terror groups. That one can continue unless there's also made an effort not only to control the entirety of the Gaza Strip by Israeli forces or an alternative authority that is not Hamas, and a focus on the group's international money.
Now, according to U.S. intelligence, Hamas is recruiting almost as many fighters as it's losing. Does that suggest that Israel's strategy might be fueling the very organization it's trying to eliminate?
Any military operation against any terror group in the last 20 years that we have seen always, of course, resulted in what is euphemistically called collateral damage, killings that you have no intention to do. In this case, of course, Palestinian civilians. That, of course, always enables the terror group to recruit and put these images on in its propaganda narrative. And Hamas had been pushing this propaganda narrative from the very beginning and purposefully putting Palestinian civilians in harm. That's why the civilians are above ground and the Hamas fighters are below ground. Otherwise, if Hamas wanted to protect the Palestinian civilians, they would be in the tunnels and the Hamas fighters would be on the top. So that is something that cannot be avoided. However, not going after the money, not controlling the entirety of the Gaza Strip, not being politically able to decide on what is the future security and administrative arrangements of the Gaza Strip, that is the problem that Israel, unfortunately, the Israeli government has created for itself.
Israel says the recent wave of recognition of Palestinian statehood strengthens Hamas and its ideology. What's your take on that?
Look, I mean, you can make this argument. My assessment of this is, of course, it's a terribly one-sided move. Of course, you have to highlight that there has to be a negotiated solution at the end of the day between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the right of the Palestinians to obtain statehood. It would have been more balanced if there was an equal international effort and emphasis on putting more pressure on Hamas. This is very much focused on putting political pressure on Israel from the European side, all irrational reasons. However, that also enables Hamas to play exactly that narrative that it was worth doing October 7. So if there would have been an equal large emphasis of pressure on Hamas, highlighting the plight of the hostages, highlighting the fact that Hamas is purposefully putting Palestinian civilians in harm's way, that Hamas is continuing to loot any kind of humanitarian aid it can get its hands on in Gaza, it would have been more balanced. And the argument from the Israeli side that it's rewarding terrorism would have been harder to make.
Hans-Jakob, thank you very much for talking with us today. That was Hans-Jakob Schindler, Senior Director of the Counter Extremism Project.
Thank you so much.
Let's bring in military analyst Marina Miron from King's College London. She joins us from Munich. Marina, Israel says it's close to defeating Hamas. Given its nature, it might be difficult to imagine what defeating it actually looks like. Your assessment, is the eradication of Hamas actually within reach or even possible?
Good morning. That's a very good question, because what does defeat in this context mean? You can have a military defeat of Hamas, which is going to be difficult, of course. But the problem here is, if we look at the history of the movement, it stretches back to the creation of Israel and to the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas is its offspring. So Hamas has been very resilient, and it is a movement which is based on ideology, and that ideology says that the territories, what is today recognized by many countries as Palestine, need to be liberated. And so you have this idea, which is a core idea amongst others, that is going to be there unless this political vacuum is filled. if you destroy Hamas militarily. And so that is a very problematic undertaking. And there is no such political plan, or at least there has not been any since this Israeli operation or the war in Gaza has started, in terms of what is going to happen when Hamas is completely defeated. Because what we have to understand is Hamas is relying on popular support. And the more Israel gets into Gaza, the more people will be essentially pushed to support Hamas, even those who were neutral before.
Let's talk about that a little bit more. Why hasn't Israel managed to destroy Hamas yet? Is it a matter of strategy, or has Hamas, as you were suggesting, become as much an ideology as it is a military force?
It has been an ideology, and that is the main founding principle. If we look at Mao Zedong's stages of armed resistance, then it starts with living amongst the population, convincing them of your cause, having them join your ranks, then transferring to a guerrilla army. So you would have, because it's weaker than a regular army, it would conduct guerrilla warfare, hit and run attacks. Also, terrorism is within this spectrum. And then once it is strong enough, then it would face the army on regular terms, the regular army. And if it's weakened again, it goes back to guerrilla tactics, and then it keeps on recruiting. So it's very difficult to root it out, because from a regular army's perspective, there are no designated uniforms. You don't know who exactly is the nonviolent state actor, who is on their side, and you have the population in the midst of it, amongst which the population lives. And so you have that problem that the United Kingdom had in the mid-50s onwards, the French in Vietnam. And those wars usually last for decades in order to root them out, because it's incredibly difficult for a regular army to adapt to this kind of strategy, short of ethnic cleansing.
Well, Hamas has said it will not disarm unless a sovereign Palestinian state is established. With more countries recognizing Palestinian statehood, is the idea of Hamas disarming at some point becoming a much more plausible one?
I don't know. We need to see what happens and how the recognition of Palestinian state will cement its political future, and who is going to be ruling those territories. Because, as I said, Hamas has been trying to offer a parallel system. It's not about only militancy. It also used to create, back in the day, hospitals, and so conduct all sorts of social programs, which is very well within the purview of a nonviolent state actor trying to replace the existing political system with one of its own. And so it could be that Hamas switches more to that side. However, complete disarmament would probably be not on the table, because I don't think that by recognizing Palestinian state, the underlying issues that exist will be resolved. I think maybe in some cases they will become worse.
That's a military analyst, Marina Miron. As ever, many thanks, Marina.
Thank you for having me.